G'day YouTube, Quaker John here. Today I have Alan with me to discuss winterizing your Vulcan S. G'day Alan.
Good day, John.
Alan is a regular contributor to my channel and he lives in Michigan, USA, and as you probably know, I'm in Brisbane, Australia. Okay Alan, so why do you need to winterize, that is, prepare your Vulcan S for winter?
That's, we've talked about this many times. This is the first winter that I've had to do something other than with my cars or my boat. I have a motorcycle, and motorcycles are a little different. Boats are pretty easy. You take them to a shop. They obviously, the boats, they use the water that the boat is in. In our case, it's fresh water, so you need to get that flushed out of there and get some antifreeze in there. So you take it to a shop, they do that. You change the oil and oil filter, both of those, and then you change a fuel filter, which basically separates water out of the fuel. And if you have a boat large enough with sinks and waste tanks and that kind of stuff, you got to change all that out. Otherwise, they'll freeze, and then you put them in storage, and that's that. Motorcycles are a little different in that they have a closed loop system for their cooling. Some boats do, but most do not. But the motorcycle has a closed loop system, or they're air cooled. And you've got, it's a really sad thing that they need special treatment if they're going to sit for any period of time. That's for a few weeks or whatever. And there are two systems, and we'll talk about that in a second, but there are two systems that are really, if you will, critical with a motorcycle. One is the fuel system. It's its own little environment, if you will. That tank and the fuel in that tank. Gasoline doesn't stay forever. I mean, it does go bad. And if you've got ethanol in it or some other type of additives these days in there, that'll hasten the degradation of the fuel. And the other system is your battery, your electrical system. So those are the sad parts about that. So what I wanted to do first, and I have some notes here, but what I wanted to do first is talk about what Kawasaki says for the Vulcan S based on their owner's manual. And that comes straight out of their appendix area, page 155. So I'm just going to read this. This is verbatim what they say. Whenever your motorcycle will not be used for a long period, proper storage is essential. The thing that always gets me about statements like that is they say long period. There's no definition by Kawasaki, either in their owner's manual or their service manual, about what a long period is or long storage. There's some clues, but because they talk about if you leave your bike sit for like over a week or 10 days, things you should be doing with your battery, and I'll get to that. Oh. But they don't talk about what a long period is. But this is what Kawasaki says. Step 1, put fresh oil in the engine and a new filter. Empty the fuel tank, either with a siphon or a pump. Remove the spark plugs and add a fogging oil into the combustion chambers. That's a pretty lengthy procedure, and I'll maybe talk about that in a few minutes. Set the motorcycle on a stand to raise both wheels off the ground. If this cannot be done, place boards under the tires to keep dampness and moisture from the rubber. Spray oil on all unpainted metal surfaces. Keep oil off the rubber parts and brakes. Remove the battery and store it where it will not be exposed to direct sunlight, moisture, or freezing temperatures. During storage, it should be given a charge of 1 amp or less about once a month. Keep the battery well charged, especially during cold weather. Tie a plastic bag over the muffler to keep moisture from entering. And that just, I think it's common sense, where there's spiders and bugs that just love to crawl around in the dark places, and your muffler system and header system is that. And then put a cover over the bike to keep dust and dirt from collecting on it. And there's no mention of anything in the service manual about how to winterize or store your bike for a long period. Now, what I've learned in kind of after we talked about this and getting ready for this discussion is and to answer some of my own questions, what I've learned is there's a myriad of ways of doing this. There's just like people, there's opinions galore. I've talked to some of my motorcycle friends here to figure out what they do. And again, I've got friends that basically take their motorcycles, put them in their garage, put them on their side stand, maybe put a trickle charger on it. They do one or two things. They either put a trickle charger on the battery or they take the battery completely out, and that's it. They just leave them. They don't do anything else. The garage is not heated. The bike just sits there. And in our particular case, the winter will start. It starts getting cold in November-ish, and it'll last into late February, March, usually late March. It's cold and icy and snowy roads, so you're not going to ride. And then I have other friends that they do all of the things. They put their bike on stands, they pull the battery out, they fog the engines, they they empty their gas tanks, they take their seats off, they do all of these preps so that come the spring, their bike is ready to go. And that's one of the things that in a lot of articles that I read too, if you don't do certain things, come the spring when you want to get going on your bike, it's not going to be there for you. You may end up with a dead battery. You'll have some bad fuel. The tires may have flat spotted depending on how you stored it. So those are all the things that they're kind of warning about for the motorcycle. So when you're winterizing, I would say there's two critical pieces. One is the fuel system, one is the battery, and then the other one is to be mindful of your tires. If you keep them on the ground, make sure you're rolling them around a little bit, and you're not leaving them on the cold concrete or cold damp ground for any length of time. Otherwise, I guess and I found out through Dunlop that does and will affect the tires. They flat spot. The batteries obviously will lose charge. They'll discharge. They'll get to a point where you can't bring them back. And your fuel system is another major variant of that. So those are the systems that kind of get impacted. So,
Excuse me.
Yeah. So that's what they recommend.
So, Alan, you live in Michigan, USA. What is your winter like, and what are the temperatures like in your garage?
I don't have a heated garage. My garage is basically every time you open and close the doors, it's exposed to whatever the atmospheric conditions are. If you take your car, drive it around, park it in the garage may get up to, because of engine heat and the rest of it, and because I've insulated it, the garage will stay around just above freezing, 35 to 38 degrees, something like that. Even if it's 15 to 20 outside, the garage, generally, there's nothing inside that freezes. It's cold. I mean, that's like taking your motorcycle. Most refrigerators sit at about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 7 degrees C, to keep your milks and stuff stored and cold. So your garage is a giant refrigerator. So that's what you're putting your bike and what you're exposing your bike to, unless you have a heated garage. The winters here in Michigan, they can get down into single digits, down in 8-9 degrees Fahrenheit, which is minus C. And like I said, there's snow on the ground, there's ice. So the winters here can be long and cold. The last few have not been that bad, but they do get cold. So that's the winters here in Michigan. I don't know. I'm assuming that in places like upstate New York, Maine, here in the States anyway, Montana, the Dakotas, excuse me, it'll get cold. Now, if you're in Brisbane, Australia, in places like California, Texas, your winters are not that bad. So, you know, you basically have the ability to ride year round. The northern states or the upper Midwest, that's not the case. And so you got to be prepared to do something with your motorcycle.
Hmm. So what steps do you intend to take to winterize your Vulcan S, Alan?
Well, there was, and I did that video on there. I did a lot of talking with the dealer, did a lot of perusing websites, chat groups, that kind of thing. Actually, motorcyclists and the cycle world and cycle rider and others had articles about it, what you should and shouldn't do, things that you could do. Talk to my friends, and then it basically comes down to just common sense and for everybody to kind of figure out what they plan on doing with their bike for a period of time. In my case, it's going to be probably November, December, January, February, maybe 5 months, 4 or 5 months of not doing any riding whatsoever. So the bike, I would consider that a long period of time. So the two systems that I was most worried about was the fuel system and the battery. The tires I've taken care of by putting them up on paddock stands so the tires are up off the ground and the bike is sitting basically over a piece of plywood. So I know that it's kind of insulated from any cold. Now it will get ambient temperatures, obviously into the 40s. But the other thing, if you remember when I did my winterizing of the bike, I put a little catalytic heater with a thermostat on it underneath the bike. And so it runs off and on. It only draws about 5 amps. And underneath the cover of the bike, it kind of keeps it at around 70 degrees. So that's nice. The battery itself, I've been watching that. I started at a certain, I think it was 15.8 volts on the battery. Over the week, it's dropped down to like 15.2. At some point here in the next week or so, I'm going to put a trickle charger on it just to keep it up. And I'm going to use a smart one, which actually charges, and then it's smart enough to realize when the battery gets a full charge, it drops to, what they call a float. So the battery is when you're storing that. Let me check my notes here, make sure I covered everything. But the battery is the big deal there, because if you've got things on the bike like the Vulcan S, we have those little clocks in there, and that's a constant drain on that battery. So it's constantly draining it. So if you're leaving the battery in, you're gonna have to figure out how to keep that battery charged up. Trickle chargers, these obviously Kawasaki says if you're gonna do that, taking the battery completely out is the best thing. It's what I do with my boat. I take my batteries completely out. You don't want them freezing. So there's that. And I talked about the intelligent quote chargers that actually charge and then float. So then the other critical path was the fuel system, and that was where there's a whole myriad again of ideas and things that people do or don't do. Like I said, Kawasaki suggests you drain the tank out completely. Okay. I looked at the Honda dealers, they talked to them a little bit, and what actually Honda recommends with a fuel injected bike is that you keep your gas tank full, that you add some kind of fuel stabilizer. I'll get to that. And you keep your tank full, and that keeps any potential for moisture and condensation in the tank from not occurring. And so that's Honda's recommendation, and I would assume Kawasaki would make the same recommendation. So for me personally, I filled my tank all the way up, and I used fuel stabilizers. Now, when I talked to the dealer, he recommended seafoam. And seafoam basically is about 50% or less of this, what they call pale oil. Not sure what that is. And then about 30% of naphtha, which is the solvent. And then an isopropyl alcohol, about 15%, somewhere in there. So what it's basically doing is it's adding a little oil into the gasoline. And when you're running it, two things are happening. One, you got the alcohol, which is basically becoming chemically reactive with any water. And then you've got this oil that's going to help coat the cylinder walls, which is another potential critical path where you don't want rust forming in there. Now, stable is another fuel additive. I don't know if that stable is available in Australia or not, but it says basically it's about 60% solvent, and I would assume that there's some percentage of oil in there. I've always put stable in my boat and filled the tanks up, and I've never had any problem in the spring starting my boat or running it. So that's kind of where I was going with my fuel system for the Kawasaki. Where I digress a little bit from the dealer and from what other people do, there is a percentage of people that will, during the winter, go out, excuse me, go out and run their motorcycle for 5 minutes or so. Have a smoke, have a cigarette, I don't know, drink a Coke or whatever while their engine's running, and then they shut them off. Okay. And I asked the dealer specifically about that, and he recommended not doing that, only because he says the engine will not get up to operating temperature. And because it doesn't get up to operating temperature, you run the risk of condensation inside those cylinder walls, which will develop water, which then develops rust. And the rust is the key piece here. You don't want the inside of the cylinder walls rusting, because then when you go to start it in the spring, your rings are going to run across that. They'll become, or you may pit the cylinder walls too. So you'll start losing compression, and bad things will happen. So that's the dichotomy. Do you run the engine during the winter storage months or not? And the real question, I think, comes down to whether or not you can get your engine up to, quote, operating temperature. And I don't know whether, I would assume based on my water temperature gauge thing, I could get it up to operating temperatures, get it up to 180, 190 degrees Fahrenheit. And that would burn off any condensate, but I'm going to do more research on that specifically. But the fuel is protected right now with stable. Fogging the Kawasaki Vulcan S is a major job. You need to remove the tank, the air box, in order to get into the air inlet system, and then spray some fogging and oil in there. It's just a real light oil that basically coats the cylinder walls and protects them from rust. That's the big thing. So those are the, if you will, the 3 or 4 critical systems: your fuel system, your fuel tank, your battery, making sure it stays charged, the cylinder walls, trying to make sure you keep any condensation or rust buildup in there, and then your tires. You don't want them flat spotting, and you don't, so just be mindful of those things. And then I would just say you need to just, do some research and do what's best for you. I don't know what temperatures, I know we have some readers here that are from Tasmania. I guess they can get pretty cold up in the mountains and whatnot. So there's a myriad of viewers out there. They're just going to have to take a look at each one of their own situations and go from there. Now, the little tidbit that Kawasaki alludes to specifically with the battery, they talk about if you leave the battery for longer, if you don't ride your motorcycle for more than a week, 7 to 10 days, they were suggesting that you put a trickle charger on it. So if you're going to ride, and then you're not going to ride the bike because you're on vacation or weather for more than a couple of weeks, to put a little trickle charger on it or to check the battery to keep it up. So that's the little caveat that I talked about earlier. When they talk about long periods, they don't necessarily discuss that, but they do say with the battery, if you let your bike sit for more than a couple of weeks, you could find your battery getting down into the point where it won't hold a charge. And their recommendation in the owner's manual is not to let it drop below 12.8 volts. Now your car batteries can drop lower than that. They can get down into the 11s, but once a car battery drops below 11, you're done. The battery won't. You might be able to recharge it and bring it back, but batteries, once they get to a certain level of charge, normal batteries, the lead acid based batteries, Once they get to a certain level, they're done. And Kawasaki's saying that's 12.8 volts on the Vulcan S. So I'm going to be very mindful of that. But I don't know. It is a different thing for me. I don't have the advantage that you have, John, where you're riding all the time. All you have to do is worry about a little rain. Worry about maybe it's 45 degrees. Of course, now you're into summer, which I'm heartbroken because I'm watching your videos and I'm looking outside and it's snowing and I'm like, this is not right. I even looked at some of my old videos, those little ones I sent you where I was riding. It's like, oh yeah, I remember how that was. So, so there you go.
So, from what you're saying, when you prepare your bike for winter, the three critical things are the fuel system, the electrical system, and the tyres. And what you're doing with the tyres, you're lifting them off the ground with a paddock stand so they don't flat spot. The electrical system, the battery, you're going to make sure to charge it regularly and make sure it's the right charge. And the fuel system, you put a fuel stabilizer in your petrol tank.
Yes, I put it. Yeah, and I ran the engine with it. I went about 20 miles with fuel stabilizer in it, so the engine came up to obviously operating temperatures, and the stabilizer was run through the engine. So if it does have some pale oils in it and that kind of stuff, it is coating those cylinders a little bit. It's one of the bad things about storing a bike for any length of time. Gravity will wreak havoc on your any engine. All your oils and everything tend to obviously get pulled down. So all those lubricants that used to be at the top end of over on your camshafts and down your cylinder walls and all that, they tend to drain away and over time. So that's one of the things why these fuel stabilizers supposedly they got this special formulator. These pale oils will actually stick to the cylinder walls. That's why they want you to either fog them so that they don't rust, or this pale oil, whatever that is, will actually stick to the wall and keep them from rusting. Because that's the only other critical path is that those cylinder walls.
So I'm throwing this question on you. When spring comes, what steps will you be taking to get your bike back running again on the road?
Yep. Obviously it's been up on paddocks, so I'm going to make sure that I've cleaned the chain and oiled everything I could. I wiped everything down. So it's just the normal, maybe a little more extensive, but just the normal checks that you make. You make sure your air pressures are up on the tires. You get them off the paddock stands. You roll things around. The engine fuel, the stabilizer in there is not going to hurt anything, so I'll run that through and put fresh gas in it as I do that. Obviously, I already changed the oil and filter, so that's good. The antifreeze shouldn't have been affected. I will put my seats back on, and there was a question about that, why I pull my seats off. Kind of two reasons. One, in order to get the rider seat off, you have to pull the paddock seat off, so you've got to get the paddock off. Then you get the rider seat off, and what that does is it allows you easy access to that battery. So if I choose to take the battery out, I can, or putting a trickle charger on it, I can do that as well. So getting it ready for the spring, down off the paddock stands, put the seat on it, make sure the battery is charged up, and start it. And hopefully it runs. And like I said, this is my first go for it. So hopefully it runs and everything's good. Go take it for a ride and get it, kind of, if you will, broken back in, because it's been sitting for quite a while.
Yeah.
So that's my plan. Obviously, you're going to do all of the checks, make sure that you don't have any rust building someplace because it's sat for that period of time. Just the normal preemptive maintenance checks that you would normally do. But since you haven't really ridden it and hasn't fallen over or crashed, really nothing. It's just the fuel and the battery electrical system, your tires, and the part that you don't see is the engine, the internal.
Well, thanks very much, Alan, for your information. Please leave your comments under the video if you would like to tell us what you intend to do to winterize your Vulcan S. Is there?
I'd like to add, if I could, that would be great, because if you do things a little differently, or if you disagree with what's going on here, what we've talked about, put those down in the comments or make some suggestions, because I'm just as open about this. This is my first go through with a motorcycle. I know what works on my boat. We drive the car all winter, so I'm not worried about that. But the motorcycle, and like I said, I've had friends that kept their bikes in storage for a long period of time and said they never had any problems. Okay, great. I'm glad they didn't. But I'd be really open to anybody else's suggestion about what they do or what they plan on doing.
Good one. Okay, well, see you, Alan.
See you, John. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoy these videos, subscribe to the channel. The Quacker John Vulcan S show is on every Friday night at 10 PM Brisbane, Australia time. You are most welcome to join in. You are most welcome to join the Quacker John chat room, and the link for your invitation to join the chat room is in the comments under the video. I publish a book called My Kawasaki Vulcan S Adventures, and it is available on the Amazon website. See ya!